My next guest, he's a taxi cab warrior. He's a DU professor, and he thinks that we should break up this stranglehold that the major cab companies have on Denver. Welcome to the show, Tom Russell.
Yeah!
Great American.
Hi, Tom. How are you, brother?
Thanks for having me on, Zinna. Thanks very much.
Hey, man, we're glad to do it. This is an interesting story. I use taxi cabs all the time, and I know the rates are too freaking high, but it never struck me that this is kind of, according to you, this is a bit of a monopoly, or I guess oligopoly they got going on.
Oligopoly would be closer to the right word.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, I'm an attorney as well as a law professor, and I represent a group called Mile High Cab. It's 150 men and women who are trying to form their own company.
And they are taxi cab drivers and
they're all
administrators?
They're all drivers currently. They drive for Yellow, they drive for Metro right now, and they drive some shuttles and some other things, but they're all experienced cab drivers.
And they're trying to get a PUC license to get this thing done?
Exactly. On the September 11th, 2008, we applied with the PUC. Last year at this time, we had an 11-day hearing before the PUC, and in July, the administrative law judge gave us a decision.
Okay, and what was the decision?
The decision was, first, that Mile High Cab is managerially and operationally fit, meaning we're a good business, we got money in the bank, we know how to run a business, all that sort of
thing. You guys
are
legit, and you could actually make it work given the opportunity.
Exactly. The second part of it was that competition would hurt the public interest.
I read the preview on this. I'm like, what? Well, what? First of all, where does a judge get off saying that? And what business is it of theirs whether competition is good or bad for the market, especially when competition is always good for the market? I don't get it. That was the judge's logic.
That's the judge's decision. What we had to do during our 11-day hearing was put on evidence how we would run the business.
Right.
And we had to go up against the other companies who threw as many lawyers as they could at us.
Well, that's what they do.
And they made the argument that if they would let us in, we would damage the public interest. Through a process that they call destructive competition.
Ooh, okay. What is this, Soviet Union, Russia, China? I mean, what? I've never even heard the term destructive competition.
Well, I don't like to use the Soviet analogy. I like to think more of the 16th century.
Yeah.
It's a fear of competition, and it's a sort of sense that if we come into the market, somehow we'll lay waste to all the competitors, and then the Denver area will be left without cab service.
Even though they admit that you are a viable enterprise and you could operate successfully.
Yeah, exactly. And notwithstanding the fact that we are going to come in and offer lower fares that are 25 cents lower per mile.
What? It's just despicable tactic.
Exactly. Well, there's worse, and we're going to not charge for extra people in the car. So if you go out with a couple of folks drinking and you all want to come home together, you don't get charged an extra $1 or so per person in the car.
It's vile. It's disgusting. It's evil.
There's additional problems in that we will not charge you for extra bags. So if you say you're...
What are you, Southwest? You're like the Southwest of taxi companies.
It's exactly. Friends ride free and bags ride free with Mile High Cab.
If you need to stuff a friend in the trunk, as long as you're Italian, that works. Get in the trunk.
Well, my wife is half Sicilian. I can't comment on that.
Me too. So I don't get this at all. It doesn't make any sense. Did you have any an appeals process that you can go through? See, I would understand this ruling if it were with respect to, say, an electric company or an energy company. I can see a reason why Xcel Energy basically has the corner on the market. They run the market in energy for the most part. So I understand how. We're talking taxi cabs, though.
Well, I agree with what you just said there. Let's say we were going to compete against Xcel.
Right.
And suddenly that would result in the entire power grid going down.
Exactly.
As we slay each other on the battlefield of utilities. Yeah, but that is simply not the situation with cab. Even if one of the big cab companies were to go out of business, we could replace those drivers could repaint their cars the same color as another company and go to work.
So I read in the notes that the rates that taxi cab drivers pay for their cab. Because do they own their cabs or do they lease their cabs?
Well, there's two different ways. Some are owner drivers, so they own their own cab, and some lease a cab from the company.
Okay.
And then what they all do is pay a lease fee to the company each week in order to drive for the company.
And it's a big chunk of change.
It is an enormous chunk of change. I brought with here a payoff sheet to show your listeners. It's radio, I know, so that's hard. But here's a payoff sheet from a Yellow driver for the week ending August 16th.
Yeah.
$943 was the total.
$900 a week to lease a cab. Now the cab company would say, well, we provide the dispatch service and all that stuff. So that's included in the $900 a week, right?
Well, yeah, and there's a set of fees broken down here. One is the daily lease revenue. That's $760 here, and then there's some extra add-ons that bring it up to $943. We believe that in order to drive these fees down,
right,
there has to be competition among more companies.
Now, do all the cab companies, and Harry, get ready to put Harry in there, Casper. Do all the cab companies basically charge the same amount to lease their cabs?
No, they don't.
Okay,
they don't at all. Well, I'll tell you that the newest, and to my mind the finest of the new companies is Union Taxi out there.
Okay.
And it's a co-op in the same model that Mile High Cab would be.
Right.
And their drivers pay under $200 a week to lease their cabs.
You see, there's something going on there.
Well, and what you see is when you're paying $900 a week, you have to drive illegal long numbers of hours.
Right.
You can't make it.
Yeah, I mean, if you got to drive 12, 14 hours, I mean, that's a hazard to the driver and the other people on the road and the passengers.
It's a hazard to everybody. Plus, it makes it so that these guys cannot live the kind of life that they're trying to live.
And truckers, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't truckers have a limit? Over the road truckers have a limit on how many hours a day they can drive?
They have a limit on number of hours per day and number of days in a row that they can drive as well. And these drivers have to exceed that in order to try to pay this lease.
Is there a similar law in place for taxi cab drivers?
There is. It's a little bit confusing. They're supposed to drive no more than 10 hours per day, and then they're supposed to have 8 hours off. So if they drive if they work over a total of 16 hours, right, they're supposed to drive 10.
You got to break it up.
Yeah. So 10 hours a day essentially, and more than that. You're saying even at 10 hours a day, it's hard for them to make any dough. You can't make a living. 10 hours a day, you can't make a living. There's another bad effect of this lease. You don't want to take the little short trips. You don't want to take the nice senior lady to the church. You don't want to take the old man to the grocery store.
So the service suffers.
The local, especially the short trips, suffer because the lease rate is simply astronomically high.
That's like me. I'm like 15 blocks from my house when I'm, smashed face down in the gutter. And I need the taxi cab. And it's hard to get one sometimes when you're going short distance. Maybe that's why they ask you where you're going when you call for the taxi.
Well, they're not supposed to divulge that. And I'm assuming when you say smash down in the gutter, it's from working out.
It's from
athleticism.
Helping little old ladies across the street. I get exhausted doing that.
Yeah, so exactly. So but the drivers, because they need to come up with $900, they want to ride out to the airport. They want a long ride.